Between 1247 to 1248, there were a number of wars between Egypt and the Ottoman Empire as Egypt was becoming more secular. Because after the destruction of the Mamluks, Egypt, and at this time Egypt was Egypt and Sudan. There was no Sudanese independence. There was no Sudanese nationality. Those passports didn't exist. Everyone was Egyptian. You were either from Sa'id Masr, or you were from Upper Egypt or Lower Egypt. There was nothing else. Just like at this time, there was undivided India. There weren't these demarcations of nationalism. 1250 AH brought in big changes, with the Spanish Inquisition ending when a school teacher was drugged from her classroom and killed in the United States. That was the last of the Spanish Inquisition. Why the Spanish Inquisition made it its business to go on to the shores of the United States, which is not Spain, is still unknown. But that was when the Inquisition panel declared that this was the last of the Spanish Inquisition. This would be the last act, and the case was quietly closed without investigation. Imam Shamil al-Dagestani rose up against the Russian Empire to prevent Chechen absorption into the swelling Russian Empire. He also sent a letter to the monarch of England, Queen Victoria, at that time saying that if he was able to, he would come and conquer the United Kingdom. In 1253 to 1258, it is believed that the reign of Queen Victoria was the apex of the British Empire and naval superiority. Right? The old statement, the sun never set on the British Empire, because wherever they had land, it was always in different parts of the world. And some people said, yes, that's because the sun never set, because you never turn your back on an Englishman because you don't trust him. So the sun never set on the British Empire. Everyone has all types of theories about that statement. But the main and most popular principle behind that theory was that it was understood that because they had so many different territories, so when the sun went down on one place, they had another territory, that it was day on the other side of the earth and they owned that territory. Further to that, the continent now named Africa, because originally it wasn't called Africa, the continent now named Africa had successfully been carved up among the Portuguese, French, British, Spanish, Belgians, and was reaping great profits from slavery. So you had the Belgian Congo, a place that the ruler of Belgium had never even been, but he owned it. It was leased to him. He'd never even seen it. The British, now brimming with slaves, abolished their international holding and kept indentured and house slaves for years after. So this is what was going on during this time. Haji Shari'atullah, to get back to him, had become so contentious that he was embroiled in disputes with the wealthy landowners and British authorities who had him imprisoned. He died in prison in 1257, leaving the movement badly fractured. After consultation and comparing creeds, they merged with Tito Mir's group, which are the Shari'ati Muhammadi. So Shari'ati and Muhammadi and Fara'idi, they became one big Jama'ah. And they began to seek further advice from al-Muwahidun figures outside of them. Another son of the Wahhabiyya born in India was Awlad Hussein. He was born in 1200. He'd learned his creed from his father, Abu Tayyib Siddiq. His father, Awlad Hussein's father, had been a Shia who converted to al-Muwahidun creed. Now, he left behind a number of children. Awlad Hussein left behind a number of children. The most important of these being Siddiq Hassan Khan Qanuji. He was born 1248 AH. He grew up firmly rooted in Wahhabiyya and wrote numerous books, as his father had, against madhabs and their fiqh, describing it as rigid and innovation. He is one of the most outstanding missionaries of Ahl Hadith, bringing the Ahl Hadith theology and ideas into Bhopal state in India, where it previously had not been. He spread that theology. When he first arrived in Bhopal, all of his children were struck by a mysterious illness that killed them all. But he stayed on. Although his wife was ill and he was ill for the rest of his life, he stayed on and began spreading his theology. Around this same time, in 1260 AH, this was the era of Mirza Hussein Ali in Persia, or Iran, who called himself Baha'u'llah, and he founded the Baha'i religion. He'd broken away from another movement called the Babi from Buzurgi Nuri, who they believed that he was the person just before the Mahdi. So many people said Mirza Hussein Ali Baha'u'llah, he is the Mahdi. He is the splendor of Allah. After the War of 1262, the United States stole most of the southwest of today's United States from Mexico. This area had been called Azatlan and included New Mexico, or Mexico Nuevo, Texas, Tejano, Arizona, Ariz, Nevada, California, Califas. All these areas became part of what we're calling the United States. That's why you notice there are so many Spanish-speaking people there. People will say, well, how did all these Spanish-speaking people get here? Well, they were there before, much like if you invade China and you build a country, you think, how did all these Chinese people get here? Well, they had been there previous to that time. And so you have them discussing, just the savage hypocrisy of a settler pirate state disputing and arguing about immigration when Azatlan is not even theirs. They're disputing about, what are we going to do about all these immigrants and all these Mexican people that are here, and something's got to be done. This population growth is out of control. Yeah, there's 300 million of you. That's the population explosion. We've got to stop that. So once you look at history, as I said before, when you look at history in its full light, you see the hypocrisy, and just sometimes it makes you laugh how ridiculous the arguments of certain people are. And if you look, you may want to write this down, the same argument, because an argument was being used at that time when they were conquering that, well, when we came there was hardly anyone there. That argument was written 100 years after those slaughterings. That argument would be transferred and superimposed in the 1960s in the state of Israel when they said that when we arrived, there was no one there. Yes, because you killed everyone. Of course there was no one there. You killed everyone. So the same argument was used. And interestingly enough, a great bulk of those Jews that had come down there, if they weren't American Jews, they were European, German, and Russian Jews, using the same theology of manifest destiny and reducing the population numbers of natives that were there in that time. And by reducing the population numbers, well, they were these small, sparsely settled lands. When in actuality, all reputable sources of population statistics state that pre-American invasion, the population of the continental United States was 100 million. Now you tell me where 95% of people go from the 1600s to where we have 2 million of them left today. While you're at it, tell me where 40 million Muslims go between 1939 and 1949 in Mao's China when he comes to power. Tell me where they are. I'd like to know for my own records, because we still don't know where the bodies are. And while you're musing over that one and dawdling on thinking of that one, think of 85 million people, which Stalin described as compost for strawberry fields, with the Shahada of La ilaha illallah on their tongues that are gone in Russia. Where did they go? Where are the original Hungarian Muslims? Where are the Muslims that lived in Austria pre-Hitler? Where are the former Hungarian Muslims? Where are the original Bosnian Muslims? Where are the original Bosniak Muslims? Where are the original Kosovar Muslims? Where are these people? They haven't been around for a while. It seems there's been some sort of mass disappearance. If we could, we would have asked our Native American brothers where we might have gone to. But they, it seems, have disappeared as well in huge numbers. So remember, this revisionist history covering your tracks, referring to annihilation and extermination and genocides as culling, collateral damage, accidental death, friendly fire. How is shutting up more than 15 families in a building and setting it on fire in the 1800s friendly fire? That's, I'm going to burn you. It's not friendly fire, but that's precisely what was happening. Now, further to this, Karl Marx published the Communist Manifesto in 1264 AH, and the theory of communism was worked out and improved upon. Levi jeans were also invented by a Jewish man bearing the same name to make it possible to use these corduroy pants for climbing and hiking in California during the gold rush. So when Levi's first came out. Not acid wash, but just plain Levi's. These corduroy hiking pants that have become the symbol of chic and fashion for so many. So you're wearing someone's name on your back, on the seat of your pants, moving around from place to place. The Origin of Species was published in 1275 AH by a man named Charles Darwin. This would give secularism a new appeal, a grand theme on where all things came from. Very important. From 1277 to 1281 AH, the new country, the United States of America, the name America coming from Americago Vespucci, was still annihilating native tribes in the continent in light of the manifest destiny doctrine. In looking at all the death and devastation in his midst, Ramadan bin Wati declared at that time, and this was a subset of the Cherokee Nation, that jihad against the invaders was fard ayn, an individual obligation. The American Civil War occurred over a confederation in the Southeast and the union of the northern states regarding centralized government, because there was a dispute regarding centralized government, whether the United States should be a confederacy of states that had their own laws, or whether it should have one central government over the entire set of them. It had nothing to do with slavery. As I mentioned, Abraham Lincoln had slaves under his porch because he was humane. The Civil War had to do with government. Who spoke for the Confederacy? Who spoke for the Union? Was cotton to be the primary trading tool, or were we to look into other things and factors during the Industrial Revolution? In 1282 AH, to return to Siddiq Hassan Khan, he moved along with his wife and children to Bhopal, but 6 months later, they died of severe illness, this unexplained and mysterious illness. He asked permission from Shah Jahan Begum to make Hajj in the year 1285 AH, and it was granted. Please be reminded that at this time, the Begums of Bhopal were a group of female Hanafi scholar rulers that ruled Bhopal for 100 years. There's a very good book on them. It's called The Begums of Bhopal by Claudia Prekel. It's one of the best books on the topic that I've seen as of yet. It's a wonderful book. It's well written. It's worth whatever the cost of it is. It's a very well written text. And it's written from a standpoint of research, lots of notes, lots of detail. The author, Claudia Prekel, has done us a service. Brought all of these documents and pictures, and even explaining how Salaffiyah came into Bhopal, interestingly enough. As a historian, how this happened. She did a remarkable job. Absolutely remarkable job. So, Siddiq Hassan Khan Qanuji, he reached Hudaydah on the 26th of Ramadan, 1285 AH. And although he was ill, he started looking for more books. He purchased the books of Muhammad Ismail al-Sana'ani, the first reviver of the Al-Muwahidun cult. What's particularly frightening is there are some Orthodox believers that use and utilize and teach from these books in their homes. It's like walking in someone's house and finding, literature from your favorite serial killer or such. It's insane to go in there. What is this doing in here? Now, I understand if it's used for refutation's sake, where you're using it to say, look, these are where the mistakes are, but they're teaching classes with it, and students are asking questions, and they're reading from the books. It's like watching something happen that you can't stop. A glass is falling from the shelf, and you can't reach there in time. It's horrible. What are you doing? We have so many other thousands of scholars, but some people have been tricked as well. So he takes Muhammad as-Sana'ani's works. He takes some works from Taqiyuddin ibn Taymiyyah and his student Ibn Qayyim, and Muhammad al-Shawkani, a former Zaydi turned Ikhwani member. Now this is another thing that's very significant. Another of the proofs that shows the connection between the Tariqa Muhammadiyah, Shari'ati Muhammadi, Fara'idi, and Ahli Hadith is the way that they quote Taqiyuddin ibn Taymiyyah and Ibn Qayyim, because they all only had extracts of their books. They didn't have whole books, they had extracts. Now, how is it that the way that you're quoting their books is exactly the same as these men in Arabiya only years before, but you say, no, we're not related to them? In fact, Siddiq Hassan Khan Qanuji, under oath, lied in court when he was brought in by some of the Hanafi fuqaha under pain of death. No, I'm not a Wahhabi.